So we've been through 2 sessions of it so far, but I'd like to repeat that my story is one story out of the some 566 of us who were released around in February and March of '73. So my experiences are mine, although I did highlight some other people that I had direct contact with and know what happened to them in that thing. There's another part to that experience that I did not cover at all, and that was the experience of the men in the South. In the South Vietnam, you had a ground war going on, a guerrilla war, and you had kids in that war, 17, 18, 19, some old kids, maybe in their 20s, 21 or 22. And they were stuck in that war and put out there in the jungles. They went through all kinds of hell in that experience. And then when their tour was up, if they were lucky, they were grabbed, thrown on an airplane, flown back to the States, and then they were dumped out in an airport somewhere and told to go home and talk to your folks or like that, and then report for duty whenever it was going to be. And in that airport, they met the anti-war crowd that were yelling and screaming at them, calling them baby killers and everything else, in some case spitting on them and every sort of thing. So that's the experience I know is totally different than the experience I had, and very, very much of a trauma to those young kids. They never really had the experience of being able to talk it out among themselves. What we could be going through today is how things got gradually better for us there in the North, and eventually we got dumped into a fairly large group of people where we had a chance to rationalize what happened to us. We had things like Toastmasters, where people got up and tried to give speeches, and most of those speeches were about individual happenings that some of our guys had experienced. So when we came off that airplane in the Philippines, we were, by and large, a lot better off than any of our doctors or psychiatrists had expected us to be coming out of that experience. But anyway, let's just continue on it.
Yeah, you used the word rationalize. That kind of threw me when you said you guys had an
I really can't hear you, and I imagine other people would like to hear you as well. So this is a problem.
Wait. You just used the word rationalize.
Wait, Tim.
I've always been told my voice is too loud. You used the word rationalize a minute ago, and when I think of rationalize, I think, well, it has kind of a negative connotation. It means making an excuse for whatever. Can you help me and help the group understand the word
Okay, I don't mean making any excuses or for anything at all. What I was trying to refer to is the ability to see what happened as something that had happened. There's nothing I can do to change it, nothing the others can do to change it. We have to accept what happened and go from there.
Okay.
You got another idea?
Did that also mean understand, try to understand what happened?
Try to understand it from that a rational human being can a rational human being understand what happened?
Got it.
And the answer we came up with, yes, we can understand it. Do we totally approve it or anything like that? No, we don't approve it. But we were able to get a solid feel that what we had gone through and our experience from what we had gone through was normal for a human being that is now on solid ground, has got sane approach to his life and what's in front of him. I hope that satisfies.
It does. Thank you.
Okay, good.
Using the word process.
Yeah. Okay, so where we are, we've been through that early years. We went through this man's inhumanity to man. We're going to the good guy area. Not much of the home again, but the good guy era we're going to talk about. I must say that what we've gone through, the different maltreatments we had gone through, such as the ropes. I explained how that thing was one of the primary torture methods that they used. The irons that we experienced, the manacles on the arms, went through that. Some of the guys still have some of the scars on their arms. I'm fortunate my scars are gone all yet. If I scratch sometime right in this area, I can feel a tingling down my thing, which I think is caused by some nerve damage that those torture cuffs had done to me. And then when I went into that room with those three guys that we ended the last session with, and all of a sudden now we're four in a room like that, and they looked at me, and I was wondering what they were seeing, so we picked up this, and I think this is what they were looking at. One of those guys up there looked like that other guy that I tried to give my food to. And so that's where we were at that time. This is not from Vietnam. It's something that my daughter picked up on the internet and put in this program. And I would be remiss if I didn't say that this entire presentation, what you're seeing on these screens, is totally comes from my daughter, Robin, who's sitting right there in the back. Bow your head. Oh, now she's waving. Okay, good. So we continue. So I'm looking at this thing now with cautious optimism. Things seem to be better. We're in the back of this pigsty. We named all these things. It seemed like a barnyard, but anyway, in the back side of this, there were rooms on the front side and the back side, solid wall in between. I'm with the three other guys in a room that has 3 beds to it. On that, so what the heck am I doing in here with as a fourth? But they put me in there. The guys were Dave Everson. He was a guy that had experience, first of all, 44 months with Larry Garino, and now I have these things, 18 months of experience on the outside that these 3 guys had that I didn't have. And so what I got is the 3 different backgrounds that he had. Dave Everson was a tactical fighter pilot, the same kind of fighter pilot that Larry Garino and myself were. We came from a tactical fighter base. Larry and I were in Okinawa. Dave was in Japan, I think. But he went down to the Philippines, or not the Philippines, to Thailand and got shot down. So he was a kindred spirit. We knew what to expect from him. Then we had a pilot who had, because of the call-up and wanting to get pilots into Southeast Asia, he had gone through a training program and then got dumped in. He offered a slightly different experience. And then we had the computer electronic geek. What they had done in our absence, they found that the F-105, they had some 2-seaters, fore and aft. They stripped the back seat of it and put in all sorts of electronics gear back there. And so we had an electronics guy who could go up there and search out all the surface-to-air missile sites, identify them, and target them, because they carried missiles on the airplane, so they identify a missile site radar. It would come back on the scope that launched a missile at that emitter, that radar emitter from that missile site to take it out. This guy had been in all sorts of research and development like that. He just didn't seem to belong in a war. He seemed to be the guy that was sitting back there at his computer and designing things and implementing. But there he was. He got shot down. So we had a lot to talk about. Now Dave, he immediately took the sleeping on the floor. They brought in a plank bed and just laid it on the floor, and he laid out his mat on that, and that's where he stayed. 3 platform beds and like that. A couple of days or a couple of weeks after that, we got the notice to put on our long pajamas. That was the formal thing. Anytime we went out to interrogation, we were supposed to have the long sleeve shirts, long pants on, looking respectable, I guess is what they thought. Instead of, we had the shorts and the short-sleeved undershirt underneath it, which was the same material as the long sleeve shirts or the pants, all one material, just cut all differently on the thing. And what we heard was somber words coming over the thing. Ho Chi Minh had died, 4th of September of '69. On it. We were sitting quietly, and the announcement. This man had died. My first feeling was, uh-oh, this is going to get bad, really bad. And the headlines then gave you the indication, expected to hold to the war policies. And if those war policies included torture of us for propaganda, then that would continue as well. But it didn't happen that way. All of a sudden, things got a little bit better, and we got word through our communication system that torture and everything had stopped immediately on the announcement that all the maltreatment like that just stopped, as though they were just, okay, we'll stop here and figure out what we're going to do. I think it probably caught them by surprise as well. Then we got a package. The first package I've received ever. And in that package was a set of plastic cards. Now that was probably one of the better things to get in a situation like that. I mean, plastic cards, you can't wear them out and like that. Heck, we started to do things like play bridge, tap on the wall, and with the guy from next door who was fluent in Spanish, we tried to learn how to speak Spanish. Of course, all we had was the tapped word, not the pronounced word, but we tried as best we could. So all that stuff was going on. The daily routine then started to become dull. And probably I haven't gone through that daily routine. So let's take a look at this thing here. What we had was a mat. I mean, as thin as you can get, it's like that. All it did was to keep you off whatever with dirt that mat was on top of on the thing. We had, oops, wait a minute, I better go back on there. I don't want to get too far. What we had is a pot with water in it. Incidentally, the Vietnamese knew that their water supply was bad. All the water we received had been boiled. As a matter of fact, when we got it, I mean, if I had a tea bag, I could have made hot tea from it. But in that pot, every day, that's where our water would come from. And of course, we'd drink it with the cups. We had our anti-hot device, which that's what they call the fans of that. I had accumulated 2 blankets by that time and wrapped, but extra color, we had at least 2 sets of pajamas at that time, and would wrap them all in there, and that became the stash for that, and also became the pillow for when I went to sleep at night on that. These were indispensable. That's our shoes on the thing. So everything. That was the spoon that we had. And I don't know what Mike McGrath meant by this, because I didn't have that thing. We had a little towel on it. Well, that was typical for what we had. Of course, the cup was very important to us because besides drinking our water from it, we also use it for communication. You put the open end against the wall and your ear on the closed end, and it amplified the sound that was coming through the taps or even the talk. Because if you turned it around and talked through that open end and put the closed end against the wall, the vibrations would go through the wall and the guy on the other side could hear you and understand you. So we found that out. And of course, this is our answer to our sanitation system like that. We found out very quickly that the edges of that bucket were not very pleasant to get near, so we put the sandals on top of it. And we had our toilet paper, toilet paper here came in about 2 foot by 2 foot sheets of what looked like brown wrapping paper, but it wasn't as smooth and as wrapping paper that you find out. And sometimes you find wood chips in the paper. But you learn very quickly that you needed to cut it up into smaller pieces and then rub it real well to get it as soft as you could before you used it. And of course, our washing was normally from buckets. With buckets, you'd get the water from whatever things were, and then you do your washing in there. You take that bucket and douse yourself with, and in February of each year, that was an experience. It's just all of a sudden, but there was a time that I had a cold, I had a little bit of a fever, and like that, I dumped that water over me, and the fever left. It didn't like it, that cold water. Everything was better. But the routine just kept on going. As I say, fairly dull. Then, now we're talking about late November and December of '69. Remember, I got shot down in 1965. So now we're dealing with the thing that's about 3.5, starting to get on to 4 years later that all of this stuff has been going on. And I still have from this 1969 until '73. So I'm capsuling a lot of experience in a rather short amount of time in presentation on that thing. And so all of a sudden, a guy in the cell behind us, remember we had that front and the back in that building, they had 4 guys in the cell behind us, and we heard a guy had been told to pack up and move. And shortly after, Dave Everson, the guy that was sleeping on the floor like that, he was told to pack up, and he moved on the thing. So something's going on like that. But then they gave us some demolition tools and told us to knock down the wall that was between us and the room behind us, which we did with the help of the three guys that were left in the other one. And now we are dealing with a double-sized room with 6 men, like that. Significantly better than it was. And these 3 new men were interesting too. 3 new stories to get through. So we had a guy who had been a Navy pilot, had been an admiral's aide, had been through Naval War College and like that, and brought in the first detailed information that I was really paid attention to about the troubles in the Middle East. And he knew that things were going to happen in the Middle East, and that was coming on. So when I heard about everything that was going on in the Middle East in the subsequent years after being released, he had forewarned it to me. Another guy was a career tactical pilot. This guy had been on a aerial demonstration team, you know, one of the things where you see the guys all in formation doing all sorts of whifferdills, and then all of a sudden a guy comes screaming across at high speed and pulls up doing all sorts of spins and like that. That was this guy, Will Gideon, like that. he was there. And then the other guy was a long-time pilot, had been in Air Defense Command and like that, but he was just an all-around good guy. I mean, really a good guy on that. And so our ability to communicate, our ability to occupy our time, we started utilizing what we really had, which was what was in our brain. And we started working on recovery, including doing things like exercising like that. When I was in high school, they gave us a physical fitness test in which you had to do so many sit-ups, so many push-ups, and all like that. I surpassed the 100% rating of my high school at that time. I did at one time over 100 push-ups, over 205 sit-ups, and like that at a time, like that. So even though I was thin and getting a little bit better, I was quite fit at that time. Nothing like I am today, I'm afraid, but that's the way life goes, I guess. So bit by bit, the two guys I spoke about, the demonstration pilot and the old-time real good guy thing, Will Gideon was just as coordinated as he can be, really coordinated. When we'd walk in, we had the increased space, and so there was about a 12-foot area that we could walk in circles in. And I would be sitting there maybe doing exercise or whatever like that, and Will Gideon and Ron Byrne, the other guy, would walk along there. And I can remember you could see Will walking, but you couldn't hear his feet hitting the ground or anything like that. And then Don Burns, it was like that. So they're just totally different. So these memories just, they fill your head on it. We had bridge, so little things of memory, the exercise walk, the silent stride and the slapping feet like that. You remember those things. Playing cards were given, and then they took them away from us. This was something from home, and they were afraid that there must be something in there that, like maybe in between the, if you got the plastic apart, something like that, you could find some escape instructions or whatever. I don't know what they thought it was, but they took the cards away. They gave us Vietnamese playing cards. After 2 days, the playing cards went from about 1 inch thick to almost 2 inches thick. But they were playing cards. Of course, after a while, you got to be able to read the cards from the back because of the way they were bent and like that. So, Spanish through the wall. Quincy Collins, one of our guys, he's a music nut. He's skilled in the saxophone. He's a bass, like that. He started a choir at the behest of the Vietnamese, but we were able to get together and provide some music for a Christmas celebration on that thing. And I became a tenor in that particular group. So the a cappella music, not barbershop, which I now sing, but regular good music like that, which is still good. At one point during those years, we were taken to Hanoi. This is a picture of a time. I am not in that particular group, but there were several groups that got brought into Hanoi, and it turned out to be good for us to get away from the things, and it also turned out to be good from us from the standpoint that there was a lot of communication exchange, because some of these people were totally different buildings and maybe even totally different camps at that time. So we were able to exchange a lot of information at events like that. So it was really strange the way the Vietnamese did that. They tried as much as they could to keep us totally isolated from the standpoint of being in solitary confinement, then only 2 guys together, then maybe 3, like that. They kept trying to cut down on our ability to know each other, communicate with other, because to them, any kind of communication was organization. Organization was something that they could not accept on that. Then we had a big move. We had those 6 men, and the guys on one side to us was another 6 men, and like that. They came in, they just started taking out people. We lost 3 people immediately on that thing. And we knew that a whole bunch of people had left the zoo where we were. We didn't know what was going on. We lost out of that Ron Byrne, the really good guy, Tom Sterling, the geek, and Jim Haichu, the guy that had been brought back into the cockpit for the Vietnam War. Like that, they left. And we, the last 3, were taken then from the pigsty over into the barn again. Well, what they had done in the barn, they had built a courtyard out here on the outside of the barn, and they had walled that thing off. And we were in 3 separate rooms there, and we turned out to be 3 men in a cell, but the cells were, during the day, were open. So we had, it was as if that whole thing was in one big room on it. Then in December of '69, we didn't know about it, but they had the Sante raid. How many people have heard about the Sante raid? There's one. Okay, let me explain that. In December of '69, our government figured they had pinpointed one of the outlying camps, which is a camp near the town of Sante. They got a bunch of special forces people, and over a period of about 3 or 4 months, exhaustively worked on what they considered was a mock-up of that camp. And they came up into Hanoi in helicopters with the idea of liberating that camp. And they did. They came up there, they landed one helicopter right in the middle of it. They killed some of the Vietnamese that were there with the guards and like that. But our POWs had been moved out of that camp about a month before, and they didn't know it. Their intelligence was not that good. But later on, when we found out about it, that they had indeed tried to come and get us, put their lives in danger to try to get us, that was an incredible boost to our morale. I mean, if anybody was worried about is our people really thinking about us or not, this was the answer to us. After that Sante raid, at the corners of that barn building, right at that corner where you could see it, and if we went down to this wash area, you could see it right there, was big, like, couplings for big cisterns. Concrete things were about that big around, and they stood about that high. What it was portable foxholes for the guards. If there was a raid like that, they could jump into that space, and they had a place to run. But anyway, after that Sante raid, they went in to had those emplacements, and then came Christmas. We're still a good guy. They gave us a Bible for Christmas Day. Now, I don't know if everybody has looked at it, but we had a service, and I was able to pick out St. Luke's Gospels, the beginning of the Gospels, and if you ever have read that, just pick up that first section. Just about, well, I'd say 75% of your Christmas hymns you can pick out of that section of the Bible. If you're interested, when you go home and you have a Bible, just pick it, open it up, and read it, and see if Christmas hymns don't just don't pop out at you almost immediately. So we went through that. We sang some Christmas things. Everything looked good. Everything seemed to be going fairly well. We had been given family packages also. We had some things to share. They had candy and things. I mean, this is pretty doggone good. Then the very next day, something was up. We knew it started early. Things were getting excited like that, and we knew they were coming in and they were doing a minute inspection, inspection that was really, really thorough on that thing. Our strip shirts, they took our clothes, they felt the seams on them and everything. They had evidently found something in some packages like that, and they pulled everything out. I was able to keep a small strip of what would either plastic or glass, real tiny, and stuck it in my mouth under my tongue, and when they looked in your mouth, they didn't see it like that. So but everything else was taken away, and we were told to wrap up, blindfolded, and then moved. We were going back into Hanoi, back into the Hanoi Hilton, the center camp like that, where we had all come in through at the first thing, wondering what's going to happen like that. But we went into a different section of the Hanoi Hilton, a different section, into the 9 of us that had just come from that three rooms in there, and came in through this, the Heartbreak Hotel section with the 4 cells, or the 8 cells that therefore thing was there. We came in through that passageway into an area that we didn't know, we had never seen before like that. But we were brought all around and into a big building here. That thing was bigger than the auditorium we had at the zoo like that. And the 3 of us the 9 of us were just dumped in this big room like that. Within a few hours, we got 10 more men got brought in and put in like that. So now we're 19. The next morning, 20 more. Now we're 39 in that room. I mean, incredible. I mean, the stories now that you had to pick up on, all the information, all this thing. So it's things like that, when they happen to somebody that's been that experience, and it happened to me when I first got released. If somebody that was different came up, I immediately have to turn to them and pay attention to them until somebody else would walk up, and then I'd have to pay attention to them. It was just, and that happened to me after release. I just couldn't pay attention to anybody at any one sustained period of time. But now we had 39 guys in that doggone room. It wasn't a Hogan's Hero thing by any means. Now, the entire experience, it sounds as though things are getting better, but as good at the very best of our experience, it didn't even meet the minimal requirements of the Geneva Accords for the treatment of prisoners of war. So I don't want you to feel that this thing was acceptable in any way. It was not. But, we formed then what we call the non-POWs. There's the very beginning of that, but what we were able to do was we were able to find out that we had senior men that were sitting in this building, Building 7, people that we had followed their instructions on through the years of experience that we'd had there. We even found out that they had men that were senior to these guys that were over in this section of the camp. We had some people who were full colonels. We go through a pay grade system in the officer rank from 01 up through 010, and our experiences, Larry and I were shot down, we were 04, rank. The guys in this room here were 05s, lieutenant colonels or commanders of the Navy, and we had 3 guys over here were 06s that had gotten shot down, had been totally separated from them, and were still, at this point, out of our communication reach. We knew they were there, but they were not enough involved with us to be able for them to exercise any command authority. So the command authority was situated still in this Building 7. My squadron commander, Robbie Reisner, the guy whose face you saw in the helmet, he was the senior man in that room, and therefore, as far as we were concerned, the senior man in all of this camp. And we found out that we had like numbers of us in all of these buildings. A lot of them were lieutenants, captains, and like that, lower grade. A few sprinkling of majors and like that who were the senior men in their specific room. We knew Al Runyon, a rather senior major, was in that room like that. But we had communication with all of them. And so with that communication, we were now becoming a cohesive unit on that. It was also in that experience was the ability to not only to find the leaders and work with the leaders and like that, but to conduct education classes and like that in there. We tried to set up entertainment. The first time I saw the new movies to Chicago was through an oral report in that room 6. Because that guy had been there for a fair amount of time, it took him about 6 hours to tell the story, because he had to describe to us what you would have been able to see on a film. He described to us in minute detail what he remembered having seen that film on that. So the entertainment was there. We had a guy gave us a course in hypnotism. Ted Ballard had figured out how he could, in his mind, conjure up a set of steps that just kept on going down, and he'd go one step at a time and concentrate on what was happening, that he's going into a trance. And he'd keep on going down until he willed himself to make his arms and legs weightless. And he reported to us that he had gotten to the point that when he had things like a headache or something like that, he could hypnotically take his headache and move it down his body, out his arm, around to his fingertip, and then he could get rid of the headache like that. Well, so he gave a presentation on that like that. I got up in the middle of the night to go, as I go too often now, to use the facilities of that. And here's all these whoops, let me get back there. Here's all these nets strung up. And in our room, they were right close together. There was no space in between them. I thought, as I'm going there, there's a guy with arms and legs hanging in the air. There's another one hanging in the air like that. It was ridiculous, totally ridiculous. But here were these guys that had gotten themselves into to a hypnotic state where their arms had just floated up. It's just strange. This guy, Jim Warner, gave us an instruction in life. He went from a possible lightning splash that triggered a reaction in some kind of a primordial ooze or whatever it was, and a cell was born. And he went from that cell, and he went through the development of life, all the way through, describing how that the human life goes through that cycle as it grows within. The that the stages that it goes through are the mirror of the stages that all life has gone through. This guy, I believe he's got an intellect north of 180, like that. But it was an incredible amount of information given to us at times like that. And we had other people that had been instructors in different military academies. A guy who was an instructor in science and engineering, like that, who passed all this information on, like that. We even had escape committees, even that, though that was fresh in our minds, it was a responsibility. So we had an escape committee, but in this case, we coordinated with the senior men in the next room, the building up thing. We had chess matches between the rooms, so that room 7 had drilled through the room, the wall between us and room 7, and we were able to pass secret messages, I guess, the escape committee. I wasn't in that. I was too senior to be in an escape committee because the seniors were the first ones taken out and run through the ringer when they tried to get any kind of information. But the chess tournaments were really something. You'd have 4 or 5 guys in your room that were crowded around a makeshift chessboard that was drawn on paper and had their way of marking where the different pieces were, dealing with another light group in the next room, and the moves would be transposed back and forth between the different rooms. The way they do it now on the internet, which a lot of people play chess. They do that today. Although we were doing it through walls like that and without any formal chess boards or pieces like that. Then we had the riot, the camp riot. Robbie Reisner was, he was a religious man to begin with. He was rather strict. He's not puritanical, but in his personal life, he was a very pure man still, and was till the time he passed away, which he has. And he wanted to have church services. Well, to have church services, you have to have somebody delivering the sermon like that. And he was ideal for something like that. But the Vietnamese had warned, don't lecture, don't instruct, don't organize, don't, they were scared of us getting together and doing something, anything. And so when they looked in at that church service and they saw Robbie Reisner standing up in front of the group proclaiming the word of the Lord, they didn't see it that way. So they had their riot when Reisner was taken out. When he got taken out, they started singing the national anthem. And when you've got 30 or 40 guys singing the national anthem like that, that really got to the Vietnamese. They didn't know what to do, and then we in room 6 picked it up at that point. One of the guys showed the flag. Incidentally, this is an actual copy of the flag, or the actual flag that came out. A guy by the name of Drevisi. The white background on that is a handkerchief that was provided by Tom Sumter. The red stripes are from a pair of red shorts from Robert Daughtry. The blue background is from a jacket that was gotten from the North Vietnamese. The white stars were embroidered by a guy called Duffy Hutton from threads he picked out of a towel. Gold embroidery was taken from the threading of a yellow blanket. And they put together this, and they brought that home with them. With the national anthem, the display of the flag, and then they started, like we do at parties, this is table number 1. They started, we are room number 7, we're 6, and then all of a sudden the Vietnamese had yelling going on as far as they were concerned all the way around the camp. They couldn't accept that. They took out all of the senior men, all the people in that room 7 that were senior. They were relocated. We found out that where they had been taken was over here. This building was a series of small cells, like the Heartbreak Hotel. So they might put two men in each one of those things. But they thought they had taken the leadership out of here. So we started to get organized. What are we going to do here in room 6 if any of the room 6 seniors are taken out? So the idea that they came up with is if anybody is taken out, we won't yell, we won't sing loudly, we'll say the Lord's Prayer. And so that was the thing. So we followed on room 7 when we would continue to get request things from the Vietnamese. And the Vietnamese started getting tired of our requests on that. They tried a program where they would only talk to our junior officers, the guys who were lieutenants or junior captains, and they knew our rank structure on that. And of course, it didn't help because as soon as they asked something of one of these guys, he would immediately turn around and walk up to the senior man in the room and ask him if this is okay, what's our answer? And then they'd bring the answer back. So it made absolutely no difference to us because the senior man was evidently still in control of the thing. So our Lord's Prayer was in our way, but what happened was in that exchange, they got a little perturbed by our senior officer. They took him out, and the prayer started. As soon as the prayer started, they brought people in, and we had windows up here. Around each of these rooms, they had a matted area that keep things totally, so when you're outside, you can't see into any of these other rooms. So they had little courtyards set up with sort of matting of some kind. They had mattings over the windows too, but the windows had a long overhang, and the mattings were hung from out at the end of that overhang. So I looked up, and they had armed guards in each of our windows, the 3 windows along the side of that area. And they had guards that were inside our door. Our door was right there. They had guards that came in here with rifles and pistols and like that. A guy was taken out, and immediately another senior man would pop up and be taken out, and the Lord's Prayer just continued and continued. It was going south very, very quickly. I was sitting on the end of one of those bunks that was in there, and beside me is a guy by Bob Lilly. He's one of the people who has the body of a man that's about 6'6", but he's only about 6 foot or 6'1". His legs are short, so he's got this huge body. He's wearing only his shorts. And I'm looking at him, and up past him at the guards in the window, and his body is getting, well, it's about the color of your jacket there, or the color of your blouse front there, red as can be. He was totally enraged, and the other guys were getting enraged too. Things were not going. So one senior man got out of another one. It came my turn, I'm not going to stand up. We got to stop this thing. You got to stop it now. So the last Lord's Prayer stopped, and everything became quiet. And they walked out. So we were able to get through that. Incidentally, our senior people said, "Don't ever do that again." Says that that's bad. That we want to have our rights, but not that way. That was bad. So they took them out. We had guys. We found out that they had been taken down into Heartbreak, like that, and eventually taken into a small camp outside of town, like that, where they were kept there until a later point when there was another big move. But anyway, the lead med left me as the SRO, and we says, okay, we got to have something else. What are we going to do? We have to have a way to communicate with the Vietnamese. So we instituted what we termed the STARE program. We had a number of guys who were 6 foot or better, and we told them that whenever they're outside in the courtyard, that on the outside of these buildings, when we're washing up, whenever there's a guard in sight, you guys just stare at them. That if you can get close to them, don't make any moves, but just stare at them. It made those guards incredibly nervous. They didn't know what to do. They were really like that. And it got what we wanted. They got me an audience with the senior interrogator in the camp, in which we outlined our things. We got a few things a little bit better, but at least we established again that they had to deal with us. They couldn't just ignore us, and they have to try on their side of the thing to understand us. So when we have things like a church service, from that point on, we had church services, and they didn't bother. We had little choirs in the rooms that sang during the church services, and things got a little bit better. There was a little bit better understanding. I wasn't by any means the one who changed that, but I had a part in it to a degree. So it just kept on working that way. Then somebody got the pink eye. I don't know if any of you has had pink eye, but it's not pleasant. And it goes through any place like wildfire. One person gets it in hours, somebody else has got it, and then somebody else and like that. The entire room is now down with pink eye. It was funny. And then we had the institute in there between Dale Osborne and Ralph Gaither. Dale Osborne, when he got shot down, had traumatic injury to his left arm and hand, in that from his arm to his hand, there was no bone connection. The only connection was the skin and sinew that was still in there like that. But his hand was starting to atrophy. Without anything obeyed him to move it or like that, it was going nowhere. This Ralph Gaither, he was proud of the fact that he was the junior ensign in the camp. He was shot down as an ensign, that would be an 01, like that. And he was up there for some 7+ years and never had a change on that. He should have been up to a lieutenant GG and to a lieutenant and maybe even a lieutenant commander. No, he was still our ensign. He sat beside Dale for about 4 to 6 hours a day, just massaging that hand, just keeping life in it. And Dale, to this day, has got a hand strictly as a result of Ralph's massaging. These are the kind of things that were going on in there, things that I'm really proud that we were able to accomplish on that. But then, possibly because of that STARE program, I got introduced to room 5. See, so I went from building 6 into room 5. And room 5 had a guy, that senior ranking officer that had been under a lot of pressure. He was still a senior man there, and everything had to run through him. You couldn't have any kind of individual responsibility whatsoever in his room. The only things that did occur at time were things like the collection of the sweet bits. Don Waltman was in charge of that. They gave us these incredibly bad cigarettes that I told you about before that wouldn't hold a light like that. And whenever anybody was finished with his cigarette, Don would be there he had a bag that he made and collect the bits from that, the sweet bits. And he would put together that leftover, whatever it was, and make a cigarette out of it using our toilet paper. But when you're a smoker, I guess you have to get to that stage. But to me, it was funny. But to him, it was a daily routine that he went through on that. So Wes Sherman, the guy that was shot down the day before I was, from the same squadron I was in that room 5. And I hadn't known it before, but the first night I got up and I saw down the way, there's Wes. He's sitting against the wall like that. And I found out that his respiratory problems were so bad, he could not lay down, and so he sat and slept through 6-7 years while he was there in North Vietnam. When he got out, they finally able to take care of him, but during that period of time, it was something to see. There was a choir there, another musical genius. We put together a choir. It was a different one. There was some hymns and some songs that I'd never heard before, so it was a good, nice experience. And then another big room, the move, dog patch, which I think that it happened because they thought that we, the U.S., was going to get closer and closer to striking targets in and around Hanoi, that they wanted to have some people that they could keep sort of on the hook. They'd have some hostages. So they took some, took us up to this camp way up near the China border, dog patch. They show it here on this side of Cao Bang, but it's actually just over the B and Bang is where that camp was, within about 20 miles of the border to China. And they had built a camp there that, from what I could see, and the others concurred, had been started to be built when they knew they were going to get more and more of us shot down. It was built around the same design thing as the one at the Briar Patch, which incidentally, that's where the Briar Patch was. That's where San Tai, Camp Hope was, and where they had moved tons of people from that one to Camp Faith. But it took about 36 hours to almost 2 days to get us from Hanoi up to there in the back of trucks, blindfolded, like that still. I thought they didn't move us without that there. We got up there around the 15th or so. That's when we first became aware of time or so. So this was about 2 more years. We'd already been here now. I've been there for 6 years on that. Now I'm up there by the China border. What's going to go on now? About dusk, we get there, and we're stuck here in this room. building. It was split where half was one room on that side and half on this side. The interior was rough concrete, the walls were thick, the light or visibility was all right up near the top. So if I would say, you would have like a little vent up near the roof of the rooms we're in. In between the rooms on either side that have a little latrine area that you could go into from the room that you were in. But they had, instead of individual beds, they had one long plank thing, the entire width of that room, with rough, very hard wood planks. And the planks were about, I'd say 1.5 to 2 inches thick, and they were uneven, so next to each other. So you had to find a place in between there to try to lay down. But we had that, and they were off the floor of only about this. This was maybe a foot to a foot and a half distance off the floor. They had drainage holes at the ends of the rooms, but the vents, they look out in these directions. The drainage holes came out the end. So they were trying to keep us from climbing up high and being able to see out and have any communication. But we crawled underneath the room beds on this side, and then with a long stick that we were able to get, stick it out that drain hole, and you could look through the drain hole and you could see that there was another drain hole over here on that other building, and now we'd use tap code to communicate between those two buildings like that. So we kept at it, kept doing it all the time. But they eventually, when we first got up there, they were trying to keep things the old way, real strict and like that. But gradually things improved, got better. The things like that, the unleaving machine. It was dark up there. There was no power at all. There was no bitch box, so there was nobody yelling and screaming at us through a bitch box telling us how great they were. But as you see, the buildings up there are all cockeyed in most cases. This building, too, was on top of a rise, and these two buildings here were down below. So they tried, the way they designed the camp, trying to inhibit communication as much as they could. It took us time, but we got it. It was very difficult to get that communication. They even though they were trying to keep it separate like that, they arranged to have films shown in this auditorium. And they brought a whole bunch of us up there. Communication again. We weren't interested in what was in the film. We were interested in the communication between us. Like that. It was something I didn't know, but things steadily got better and better like that. It seems as though they knew something was going on. Yes?
I'm just wondering how the civilians among you fit into the command structure.
Okay, where's that thing?
I'm wondering how the civilians among you fit into the command structure.
Oh. The camps I was in, there were no civilians at all. As a matter of fact, there was the only military civilian combinations were in the camps of those people that had been captured around Hue. They were on the North Vietnam during the Tet offensives and brought into the North Vietnam. They were brought up as one big group, including whatever military people were among them. So that was the only crossing. And there is, to my knowledge, cases where there was a little bit of friction between like senior State Department civilians and military leaders that were in those camps, which would be an interesting thing to delve into, but I myself am not qualified to address it.
Thanks.
Yeah.
I wondered whether the POWs knew about the campus unrest, the protests, all the
bitch boxes.
all the stuff that was going on in the United States, whether you heard about it, knew about it, and what your reaction was when you heard, if you heard about it.
Of course, the bitch box at every turn gave us blow-by-blow description that was magnified probably 10 or 20 times in the way they described it to us. And I have to admit it was very depressing. It was extremely depressing to hear that, especially since the American people who were protesting are the ones who elected the people in Congress that signed off on us being there in the first place. So I can understand it in retrospect, how they probably felt, but it just, things didn't change fast enough in my estimation when they recognized what kind of a conflict that they were in. I believe that the war in the very first case was ill-advised and was totally mishandled from the very beginning.
You've spent a lot of time talking about communication amongst yourselves. I'm curious if there was any English communication between you and your captors. It sounds like probably not very much, but you also mentioned a little while ago that you went out and negotiated with some of the camp leadership. Did they speak English, or how is the communication between the North Vietnamese and the prisoners?
The interrogators, the people that were in the quiz rooms like that, spoke English to a varying degree. They had some that were quite good. They had some that understood some of the nuances of normal stateside communication, but the majority were very poor, and nuances in things went by them completely. And that's so when we wrote things like that Blue Book biography I spoke of in the last session, I thought you could write garbage, and they didn't have enough of an understanding of English to appreciate that we're really giving them a bunch of guff in that thing. So, Walt.
Was Ernie Bracey in the North by this time?
What?
Was Ernie Brace in the North by this time?
He got brought over rather late, as I understand, into North Vietnam, but he was not with us in the North and not with us in the South. Would you explain to us Ernie Brace from what you know of him?
He was a former Marine. I guess he flew in during Korean War. Had a few problems with the Marine Corps. Was discharged. Vietnam came out, and he was flying for one of the aid companies.
CIA companies.
So. Another POW that was shot down over Laos, and he had quite an experience also in Laos. But towards the end of the war, I guess he was shipped to the North before release with Jack Butcher. And, okay.
The interrogator that spoke very good English, or pretty good English, did you have any indication of where they were educated, whether They were educated in our universities or Australia or some English-speaking nation.
I really don't know. But there was no, for example, British nuance to their language or anything of that kind. I think they were home educated. I really think that they had gone through English language courses as they came up through school and then joined the military and got into it. Because with few exceptions, the ones who had good English were quite young in comparison to the camp leadership. And the camp leadership just didn't seem to have the ability in the language, with, as I say, a couple of exceptions, because the guys that were trying to groom guys for early release, they were quite senior and very good and could very well have been educated in our country, but I don't know that. We have
You mentioned that you had a black cellmate that was a pilot that was very, very badly treated. Did you get questions from the interrogators? Did they really want to get into the race discrimination in the United States? Was that something that was interesting to them? Did they talk about having a parallel in their own country?
They didn't have any parallels in their country, but the black people, there were several more black officers that had been shot down. One of them was a backseater, a electronics man, and like that I know quite well, Tom Madison. But no, they tried to hit those guys individually on the race, but they generally accused us, the entire nation, of being racist on that. But they didn't try to work that angle with us specifically. As I say, the treatment started getting a little bit better and better on that thing. Then we heard of one man who was taken out of the room and was very ill. We think he probably had typhus. Warrant Officer John Fredericks, he was taken away from the camp to where we didn't know, but he did not survive. So he's one of the people. So I don't know what happened to him, where he went on that. But then we started to get preparations for release. In October of '72, things started dramatically improving. We had a major reshuffling there within the camp. So in our room 9, myself and the room 5 from the zoo, a senior ranking officer had come up and was in this building with me, room 9, we were moved over to this room 2. Along with a number of other people that had been taken from different of the buildings around that camp. So we said, what the heck is going on? Communications we got received was the ones in that room 2 were the ones who got shot down very early in the campaign. We were now being organized by the Vietnamese in the date of our capture. All through our captivity, whenever anybody from the Vietnamese would ask us what we thought about getting released, says, yes, I want to be released, after the sick and injured, and after people that were shot down, were captured before me. And that was the single word that they heard from all of us, every one of us, sick and injured by capture date. And all of a sudden, we are in a building now with everyone's in that building had similar shoot-down dates. A few of them earlier than me. One of them, Bob Purcell, a very strong religious man who also happens to be a very open and gregarious man, just a wonderful guy at that. Was in there. All of that. It's just, the morale, of course, went through the roof. And as I mentioned, Bob Purcell, he was the one. I mean, you talk about an optimist and talk about somebody who was always up high all the time. That was Bob. Bob also, in the very early days in that camp in the zoo, was in one of the rooms in the pool hall before they remade it into a number of smaller rooms, was in one, found out that they were starving a guy in another room, managed a way to crawl up into the overhead, went over and where they had a light coming down through the roof on the end of a cord. He enlarged that thing and dropped bread to this guy through that hole like that. He utilized that dead period of time during the middle of the day when the Vietnamese went into siesta to go and accomplish something like that. He was quite a guy on that. But it just continued there. November, December, we were there, we were in release, ready to be released, but nothing happened. We, of course, didn't have the bitch boxes that they had down in Hanoi, in the rooms there. We didn't know about the bombing, what's occurring on that thing. I was able to convince that stickler of an SRO that, look, we've got guys here who have been in the Air Force for years. They're highly capable like that. Let them handle some of your chores. I mean, you got too much on your plate. You're trying to do everything. So he did. I was his assistant senior SRO at the time. So he started giving it to things, and it gave some of the other guys something to do like that. Something that he should have done a long time before, but he would. After 2 days, he said, the relief was really palpable. He really experienced the relief on that. The morale in his, and with his morale and the morale of his people, then of course climbed the thing. We didn't know about that Christmas bombing. Christmas bombing, the B-52s. That's when the B-52s who had been doing some bombing in South Vietnam, going across, were turned loose around Hanoi. Now they were coming from as far as away, and I have to go down to about here someplace, from Guam, the island of Guam, or we had some bases right here on the Gulf here in Thailand. But they would go up and make runs across there. We lost a number of B-52s, and with the B-52s, they picked up a lot more prisoners of war, and they've had a lot more injuries because of a large airplane that got blasted out of the sky. Some of those guys got hurt fairly badly on the thing. But they were doing, and at the same time from Thailand here, out from the carriers that were here in the South China Sea and in the Gulf of Tonkin, they just kept hammering things on it. And you can think of Nixon what you want to, but he's the one who gave the orders to increase the bombings when the peace talks in Paris were stalled. And around that period of time, there was a tremendous load of munitions that were dropped on North Vietnam, and they came back to the table and they reached the agreement. So around January 73, we heard trucks coming. I was in that building 2 in a fairly large room, and when we heard the trucks come in, the guys got up and looked through the vents right way up at the top of the roof and could see that they had trucks enough for everybody that was in that camp up there. And so that guy, Bob Purcell, you ever see those things where they have motorcycles and a big round, like, tube or something where they can start going in circles and then climb up the wall? I swear Bob Purcell was running around the walls in that room. He was so excited like that. That's the only thing I can remember of that time is Bob. That was one of the many little reminders I had. As I said, he was went berserk in a happy way. Next day in the trucks, no blindfolds, no manacles like that. Back to the start of the 4th Allied POW Wing. The 4th Allied POW was essentially finally formed there in January of '73. On that, we had there in Humidity, where we were all brought back to, where those 7 big rooms around. They had now contact with the senior men that were over and joining things. And that's the patch, the 4th Allied POW Wing, a chained eagle. There's the chain. The 4th, we figured the 4th Allied because World War I, II, Korea, and Vietnam, we had military fighting forces from numbers of nations that participated. We don't appreciate it that much from Korea and Vietnam because we don't think of it that way. But for example, in Korea, my flight commander in F-86s was a Canadian. So we had fighting men from all numbers of different services. So that's where we got the 4th Allied POW Wing. Each of those rooms 1 through 7, became a separate squadron within that room like that. We were called out by the Vietnamese. We called out and we fell into ranks as military men should. And we then listened to the announcement of the Paris Peace Accords, officially titled The Agreement on Ending the War and Restoring Peace in Vietnam. That's what our Secretary of State signed with the delegation from North Vietnam. We listened to them read it. There was it's quiet in the ranks, completely quiet. Although in that setting, the senior 06s, the full colonels like that, had not been brought out into us like that. And so the senior man on it was again my squadron commander, Robbie Reisner. After it, he called us all to attention and then asked the squadron commanders, the SROs for the different rooms, to dismiss us. And then we went back into our rooms, and that's when we celebrated, but quietly. We weren't going to give the Vietnamese anything with it, so I don't know if they expected us to yell and scream or whatever, but we didn't there. In the days following, the doors were open. You could go out in that big courtyard between all those rooms, and you got to meet all the guys. I got to meet Larry Garino and Smitty Harris, Wes Sharman, Ray Merritt, and my squadron commander, Robbie Reisner. I got to meet them again, plus people that I knew very well, but I'd never seen their face because they were in another room, but I had talked to them through the wall, so I had experience with them. So you put the faces to the names, and tap buddies and like that. And you make lists. I've made on a bunch of, on the toilet paper I had, everything that I heard from somebody during all those years on like, this is the best tailor, this is the best place for this. Everything was written down in lists. And then I had this list that's about like that, real small letters, like that, and I said, oh boy, they might go through this stuff and I'd lose it, and I want that information. So then I took this list, and I mean, I really got small letters, and I got it down into a list about like that. So I thought, folded up. I still have those lists at home to this day. Oh no. The release, the big day. On the 10th of February, they gave us a copy of what they had read to us before. So each band got a copy of that agreement that had been signed in Paris. They gave us the clothing that we came out in, the shirt and the pass, the jacket, the shoes, like that. All of that we received, all that. And then on the 12th of February, we lined up. And this was there at the airport before leaving. And remember in the Hanoi March, I showed you pictures of Pop Kern and Red Berg. There they are. They're right there in the middle. And you see a bunch of things. You see one white, really white forehead there, that guy there? That's me. That's me. I was in that lineup. This is Bob Purcell, the guy I talked about. Back here, the guy who was standing beside me is Ed Harris, and he was the one who smuggled out a small dog. And we had this little satchel that we had, and he had that dog in there. The Vietnamese used raised dogs for food. And this dog came out of the kitchen. He was going to be slaughtered for food. Like that. So Davis decided that he was going to liberate that dog, which he did. So we're on the way, where this is here, we're standing there. The release table is probably right about down here, not showing in the photograph, where we'd come individually, salute, and report for duty. We were taken from that table and then a right way to the loading ramp into the C-141 with all those nurses that were in there. That was different too. That was the date, 12th February. We were leaving Clark Air Base. That's when the first guy comes off with Jerry Denton. And when he ended up his talk as saying, God bless America. People always said that we were instructed on what to say. Definitely not true. They would tell you when you were in the airplane, when we're going to stop here, would you get out, when we get out, would you say a few words? No advance word, no real time to do much to that, but that's what happened. The long flight to home occurred essentially around the 15th. I left Clark Air Base as a senior ranking officer on one of the C-141s. We went to Hawaii, stopped in at Travis Air Force Base in California, went into a smaller airplane, stopped in St. Louis, and then I was brought to Wright-Patterson Air Force Base outside of Dayton, Ohio, where that was the place where I met my family. I met my wife and my now grown sons. My twins were just out of first grade and going into second grade when I was shot down. They're in high school now, and so things are a little bit different on that. When I got to the to Travis Air Force Base. As a senior man, they asked me to say something, and I said that you, and I meant the American people, reached over time and space, took us by the hand, and brought us home. For this, I am eternally grateful. That was a scene in one of the airplanes. This is not my airplane, but it's one. I think this one you'll find on the internet all the time. I think they like this guy's expression and the hand raised in the air on that. But this is my airplane, and that's me right there in that airplane. And the guy that has the dog is right there, and this is Windy Rivers, the guy that I passed cigarettes to through a wall, and I had not really met until the time we were in that courtyard after the announcement of our release. This is me getting off the airplane at Wright-Patterson in Ohio. Quite a bit thinner than I am now. My wife, my mother, 4 grown sons. I would be remiss if I didn't remember these men. We talked about some of them, but these guys were prisoners of war, and their bodies were returned. We talked about Earl Cobiel, the guy the Cubans mutilated, struck in the face over and over, and he had no reactions. We talked about Ed Atterbury, one of the 2 guys on that release from the annex outside the zoo that started the big purge in the zoo, that he survived 2 days after he was picked up. We talked about John Frederick. Guy had the misfortune to get sick, didn't come back. Lance Sijon has got a hall named for him at the Air Force Academy. Ron Storrs was with us for a while. He was a strong, very strong resistor. He left our company. We never found out what happened to him. His body was returned. And so this is not all the names, but these are some names that are important to me. After I got home, I had the chance to go flying again. To this day, we have what they call the Freedom Flyers down at Randolph Air Force Base outside of San Antonio, where we could get flying time. I got something like 25 hours of flight time in a T-38 on that thing, and this is coming down from the cockpit after my first flight after being released. Just last month, we had 2 more guys that were flown down there outside of San Antonio at the Freedom Flyers reunion. They hold a reunion there for us every year. As I said, we formed the 4th Allied POW Wing, and we continue in that as an organization, and we really believe that our intended purpose to return with honor, that we were able to achieve that. I'm open to your questions.
Ron, you had mentioned, I believe it was in the first session, about 11 or 12 fellow POWs that got some kind of an early release. You didn't go into detail, but at least I got the impression that you don't respect those people very well, except for one that was, sent back purposefully with a mission. Could you expound it?
Yes.
at all?
These people in some cases were directly ordered to quit hobnobbing with the enemy, giving the enemy propaganda, using the opportunities provided by our enemy to get on the bitch box and talk to us with their propaganda. They were told that this is just, what you're doing is not honorable. This is not in accordance with the code of conduct that we are supposed to have been ascribed to, and yet you're doing it. And they actively engage with the enemy in order to get their release. As I said, one of them happened to be a man who had been an ace during the Korean War. I think he shot down 9 MiGs on that. During that Korean War, we also heard that he was the type of guy that went off on his own, and that's how he got to shoot down all the MiGs. He didn't follow flight discipline. But since he shot down the MiGs, it went by. But he was one of the early releases. About 6 months or 8 months ago, I received a message, or an email, from a guy in St. Louis. There was I belong to an organization they call the QBs, the Quiet Birdmen. And we have a chapter here in Prescott. They have a chapter in St. Louis. And they had a guy that was wanting to join their particular chapter of the QBs and wanted my opinion, because he was curious about this man like that. And I said, well, this man accepted early release from the North Vietnamese. Says, I can't support him. I can't tell you what to do about it, but I can't support him. As far as I know, he was not accepted into their organization. So yes, we still have feelings about those people. Recently, one of the men who was a senior ranking officer in one of the areas of our camps, a guy by the name of Ted Guy, G-U-I, he passed away, I think, right at the end of '99. But as long as he was alive, he was trying to press for charges against not only those men, but some others in his camp that he thought did not what he called measure up as others did on the thing. So, yes, we have our reservations. And we know that people have different abilities to take pressure, torture, or what have you. But we also know when a guy makes no effort, and that we can't accept.
Thank you.
Yes.
Yeah, I was just wondering,
Suzanne?
when you first arrived at Clark, that would have been your first kind of set down outside of Vietnam. Was there a big group of people from Clark there to meet you, or was it known to them? Or this is maybe not that important to you, but I was just curious.
The ramp was loaded with people. I mean, all over the place with people, So I would imagine we were the most popular thing in town at that time. So
I was able to go to last session and this session. I don't know how many sessions you had before, and I don't know whether you mentioned this, but you were in a 2-seat F-105, is that correct?
I was in a 2-seat 105 for that one mission prior to my shoot down, the one in which I carried a photographer in the back seat from the Air Force Photography Service and carried a big photography pod on the wingtip of that airplane. And so that airplane was slower than the one single place airplanes. And where that other pilot who was leading the flight ran off and left me. And that was the reason I got on the second one in a single seat airplane, which all my other missions were in single seat airplanes like that. And where I got shot down because I think he was going slower than we were briefed to go. So
I wondered about that because you had never mentioned your wild weasel or the weapons guy behind you, and so that explains that.
Yeah,
You
well,
mentioned the name Larry earlier today, and I didn't catch who Larry was. Do you remember that?
Larry Guarino, yeah.
Okay. Thank you.
Larry Guarino was not in one of those two-seater F-105. He was the operations officer from one of the other squadrons at our base there at Kanina, Okinawa. So, but if you have any questions about South Vietnam, we have an expert with us here from South Vietnam. So it's your opportunity to ask Walt what it felt like to be a ground pounder that happened to get sitting on the side of a road, was it?
Yeah.
Sitting by the side?
Over at the time and coming back
Yeah.
on a mission and
He was on his way back from where he was. What did you go off for a hamburger or something? And went on the way back to the camp?
well, we had a four-man forward observer team. We never got paid, never got our mail. I was sent to the rear echelon to pick everything up. We had about a quarter-mile road going into our camp. Used to get booby-trapped every night. I was sitting on the road waiting for something that was sandbagged. I was sitting on the side of the road waiting for something that was armored or sandbagged to get into my compound. And three individuals in South Vietnamese uniforms came up to me. One had an M14, one had a 45, one had nothing, which was traditional for the South Vietnamese. They got in front of me, one leveled the M14 down into my face. I thought he was joking, and I pushed that out of my sight and put it back on me. I didn't realize the other two worked their way behind me. Next thing I was face down in the dirt, having my arms tied behind my back, my boots taken off, rope tied around my neck, and 4 days later I was in a mountain POW camp with another individual, Sergeant James Dodson. And just to answer your question, him being black, the interrogator that came into our camp used to lay on that pretty heavy, what are you doing here, you should be home fighting. So, but that was a camp in South Vietnam.
Mm-hmm. So you've got a lot of experience here in the room between the two of us, like that. So if you go home with a question, please, that's all I have at this point. Wait a minute.
Question.
Let me get you, well, I got it on the microphone so they can.
What was
When
it
you were a
like?
PO,
Oh,
when you were a POW, you escaped from the camp, is that correct? Did I catch that?
I was being transported to walking to another camp. I was called the first line camp, where you get your initial indoctrination. And it was only myself and one other American, and we had about 12, 14 Vietnamese, combination of military and political prisoners in my camp. We were getting transported by foot to a camp on the Laotian Cambodian border called Tri Ba. And a lot of the people that ended up in North Vietnam, Frank Anton, and people like that, that was a jumping off point to get into Laos and up the Ho Chi Minh Trail. And en route to that camp, we escaped. I was down to 98 pounds. Left side of my face was rotting away. Had holes in both my ankles from the way they used to tie me up. All my toenails were gone. And that was in 1966. I don't think I would have made it to 73 like Ron, you know. I was going down so fast. So I was option A or option B, and I chose option B. I didn't care for their cooking.
How long did it take you to get back with,
In 4 days, 4 days after our escape, we got to what they call a PF camp. And it's South Vietnamese militia. And Jim was about over 6 foot tall. I was in the lead. My boots, my trousers were bloused with my boots, so I looked very Vietnamese. And where we were coming out of, it was bad man's land, so we actually had guns raised on us. And as Jim got a little bit closer, they realized he was black. So they held off on the guns and led us into the camp. Actually, my Vietnamese was pretty good. I learned Vietnamese before I got captured. Never letting the Vietnamese know I knew Vietnamese. But once we got into the camp, I told them we escaped from the Viet Cong. And right away, Jim and I, were saved, were rescued, so they got on the radio and tried to call, right down the road from that camp was a place called Amboy. And there was a military Marine base there with a small airstrip. I think they had 127s there. And their radio didn't work, so our morale went down right away. And somebody jumped on a bicycle, went out the back of their camp. A little while later, an ambulance came, picked us up, took us back into Amboy, and we had several hundred Marines around us cheering us on. And at that point, we realized we were safe. And Jim, Sergeant Dodson, his time in the Marine Corps was actually up at that point. And I had the choice of duty station, and this is 1966, and I guess nobody ever accused a Marine of being intelligent. So I had about 5 months left on my tour of duty. I volunteered to stay in Vietnam, finish my tour out, and gain some weight back.
and how long were you in captivity?
39 days in captivity, 4 days on the escape, so a total of 43 days.
Mm-hmm.
I got it. Give that to Walt.
Whatever, don't ask me.
I was just wondering if you could kind of tell us what it was like, having been through such a traumatic experience and then coming back and having to reintegrate to normal life.
As I said before, when anybody walked past me, my attention went directly to that person's. So I could be talking to you, somebody walked by, and I'm over here. I'm gone. So everything was changed. By that time, of course, we had what we hadn't had before were mini skirts and like that. I'd never seen that before. That was different. I see all this, what seemed to me, pornographic images all around the place on thing. So all that was different. The Catholic Church at that time had changed from the priest with his back to you to the priest facing you. That had changed. I mean, so many things were different. I'd left with 2 small children that I would tell nighttime stories to that were now teenagers like that. I had another son who had significant physical problems that first time in the first about 6 hours of there, I saw him fall down one time, and I went to pick him up, and my wife was advising me that I shouldn't do that because he needs to learn how to do things himself. So a lot of things have changed. Went to that after going to the hospital for just a few times there at Wright-Patterson. Then I was released to go back to a room that we had in quarters there on the base. And now I was with a woman. That was very enjoyable. So So things were different. It took time to accommodate to it. But, and then we had this attitude by everybody that we saw that you're heroes. And we were 559 guys that just got off of airplanes there in the Philippines and came home. We weren't heroes. We were guys who came back to get started with our lives. I mean, the idea that you're a hero because you were tortured just doesn't seem to hold merit. But yes, we were tortured, and we behaved as far as possible, in our estimation, honorably. But that's what we would expect of anybody that we put a uniform on and entrust them, like I was entrusted, with 2 hydrogen bombs sitting under the wings of an airplane I flew. What kind of a man do you want to fly those things? And I did fly those things. So I think we behaved the way we were supposed to, but we filled something that the American people needed at the time. We were just over a war that was so unpopular among both the American people and the people who were fighting that war. And we needed something to break that thing, and I think we were it. We were sort of like a pivot point to change the attitude of the American people at the time. They had something, when they looked at a military man, they looked at something that was to them beneficial. This person means something, and something that I can appreciate. So we went through all of that, and it was, for a while it was bewildering to us, but we got through it all right. Within the 2 years after I got home, I lost my wife, and I found a woman I spent 46 years with. I thought, so indeed, I've been through a lot. I've had a lot of things happen to me, but I have to say, I think I'm very blessed in many ways. I've known a lot of good people, and I still have a lot of good people, as witnessed my daughter. So, just.
As a draftee, 65 through 67, returning home, I would contend that the nation has never healed. Now, I know that it healed a little bit around the POWs coming home, but the draft created great rifts in families and in communities. You had the people that wanted to stay out of the draft, so they got their wives or girlfriends pregnant and were able to get away with it. And we've got a president that had a bone spur that the doctor was paid off, and you had the people that went to Canada. I met a fellow in Mexico a few years ago that ran off to Canada, and so you had a lot of turmoil there that in my own family it has never healed because of the fact that, I found out that my local university, Michigan State University, was up to their eyeballs in just shoving Vietnam down the throats of the students. And my sister-in-law was one of 6 assistants to the registrar out there. The idea being that you couldn't talk about it and make any headway. So there's still a lot of turmoil over it.
It hasn't healed. the only healing I think that it ever will have is that our younger generations grow up, and those of us that have those strong feelings pass away. But there's one thing I think that's especially apparent to me anytime I travel outside of this country. If you get into an area where you and another person that you found are from the States, you don't really care that they might be Republican or Democrat or anything like that. They're American, and you immediately feel a connection there. And I think that we will always have that feeling, that even though we have this separation as we get it into any group, like this group here, I'm sure there are some people that have very strong liberal feelings and some people that have very strong conservative feelings. But to take them in a contentious situation where they are American against somebody who is not, I think you'll find they will join together. And I think that is an underlying a glue that's available. And I think that underlying glue may be what will help this country in the end result heal.
Yeah, this is just a statement. When you people were talking about blacks and whites, I was in Germany in '66 or about that time, and there was a black officer, I think I was on an infantry base, and the Germans would say to him, "Why would you go to Vietnam? You're black." You know what I mean? And we're not talking just about our country, but we're talking about how another country looked at the way we were handling our racial tensions.
Mm-hmm.
Couldn't help but to think about the comments that this gentleman made in front of me about the divisions within families that and the people that still don't talk about it, or don't talk together. My father was a World War II fighter pilot. He was shot down in northern Italy by the Germans, and went right back in from the Army Air Corps into the Air Force, and was 33 years. Retired as a bird colonel. But I remember during the Vietnam War, of course I'm of that age where I was in the draft registration. And at that point I was married and in school, and for somehow I got some kind of a deferment. I still don't know how that happened. But my dad said to me, he didn't talk a lot about the war. He was very, very proud military man. But he said to me one day, and he kind of had mist in his eyes, he said, during that period, he said, it was really tough for the military people, particularly the career military people, watching what was happening in the street, watching returnees come back and be spit on and called baby killers. And he said he was asked, and he was in California at the time, going back and forth to the Pentagon, and he had a commanding officer who told him, he said, "Bert," he said, "we'd really like you not to wear your uniform coming back. We'd rather you be a civilian so that we don't have this kind of problem." He said, "Son," he said, "do you know how painful that is to a man who went through 3 wars or 2 wars and be told that you can't do that?" And he said, we didn't start this war. He said, but we're doing what we should do as warriors. But he said that was the low point of his life, was to be told he could not wear his own uniform.
Yeah, I can appreciate that, and I can thank God for the one thing that I never had to go through it. And when some people hear of my service, they don't think negative things about my service the way they can think in other cases. So in that case, again, I think I'm very blessed. That doesn't happen to me.
Oh, I don't know how to say this. I think maybe different than you, but I think you're a hero. And the other prisoners of war that I was in high school, I watched family members and relatives
serve, and they came home, and they came home with their bodies intact, and they didn't run. But even if they had the pressures of what, the idea that if you left the country, what you would be, I'm getting kind of emotional about this, you know, just, you would leave your country behind because you felt so, I mean, like if you went to Canada as a defector, that you wouldn't be able to come back to the United States, you left your family. Those were things that some of these men were looking at. That must have been devastating for them and their families. But you were there, and you fought, and you were captured. And you may not think you're a hero, but I happen to think you are. And McCain, and other people who maybe haven't been held up in the same regard. But we're here, we're alive, we're free, and a lot of that has to do with the fact that people like you were over there fighting whether you wanted to or not.
Yeah.
So I thank you.
Thank you. Well,
This is probably a silly question, but you guys, when you got released, where'd you get those jackets? You said that they saved them for you?
I thought that was.
The clothes you were wearing,
they were given to us by the Vietnamese. Where the Vietnamese got them from, I have no idea, nor do I want to know. So, I thought,
Burned them in Clark Field, right?
pardon?
You probably burned them in Clark Field when you got there.
Good. As far as what, I don't know what happened to it because mine were left there at Clark Field, so that was it. I thank you for your attendance. I thank you for the questions that you found to give me, and I hope I've given you something, maybe something to think about.
Thank you.
thank you.